You're listening to Paleo Runner Podcast, a podcast devoted to finding better ways to live, run, train, and eat. I'm your host, Aaron Olson. You can find more information by going to paleorunner.org. You also find me on Facebook and Twitter. You can go to facebook.com/runpaleo. My Twitter handle is @runpaleo. If you enjoy the show, please go to iTunes and leave a review. This helps increase the visibility of the show. Search for Paleo Runner in iTunes. Click on Ratings and Reviews. You can email feedback to aaron@paleorunner.org. If you downloaded the show through iTunes and are listening on an Apple device, you can follow along with links and chapters. Today's podcast is brought to you by audible.com. Get a free audiobook download by going to audibletrial.com/paleorunner. Over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. I just finished listening to The Willpower Instinct. I found this book really interesting, and I've been using the methods in the book to enhance my daily activities, including running and just helping me become more productive. Just by getting your free audiobook, you're going to become more productive. I listen to 2 to 3 books a month just while I'm driving in my car or out for a run. The great thing about Audible is that if you don't like the book, you can actually return it for a different one, and I've done this several times. Go to paleorunner.org and click on Audible at the top of the page. My guest today is running coach Eric Orton. I first heard about Eric after reading Chris McDougall's Born to Run. In the book, Eric teaches Chris McDougall how to run with proper form and eventually coaches McDougall to run a 50-mile ultra-marathon in the Copper Canyons of Mexico with the Tarahumara Indians. Eric's approach to training has been featured in Men's Health, Esquire, Men's Journal, and Ski Magazine. He's the former director of fitness at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. He's a certified functional training specialist, a certified sports hypnotist, and holds coaching certifications in both USA Triathlon and USA Cycling. Eric's latest book is called The Cool Impossible, and it's available for pre-order on Amazon. Thanks so much for being part of the show, Eric. It's great to have you on.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I love being on.
So how did you first get interested in running?
Oh man, I was always an athlete. I mean, my earliest memories are, running in the playground, and I actually was a football player, real early on. So, ironically enough, I was a running back. So running and sprinting and the whole athletic background was really kind of with me from day one and as early as I can remember.
Okay. When did you start to get into the longer stuff?
Yeah, I played college football, and then after graduating, moved out to Colorado, and one of the best decisions I ever made. And when moving out west, I just kind of was looking for kind of how to take my athleticism to post college and what that's going to look like for the rest of my life, and really just kind of got caught into the whole endurance world of Boulder and Denver, and just really started loving being out in the mountains all day running. So it was I don't know, just one of those kind of life-changing moments for me.
What were there differences that you saw between how, as a football player versus a distance runner doing these longer distances? What kind of things drew you to that longer distance?
Right. Well, ironically, my background in sprinting and kind of the faster twitch type of running and training really helped me to develop my system and run technique and a lot of my run philosophy for endurance. And I think a lot of times we try to separate the two, and rightfully so from a training standpoint, but there's a lot of principles that we can take from either and apply them. So my background really, I think, allowed me to see things a little differently that really helped.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about how you got Chris, talk a little bit about how you and Chris McDougall met, and how did you get him to eventually run a 50-mile ultra when he came to you, he was injured, right?
Absolutely. Well, he came to me to do an article on my training here in Jackson Hole, and we met in Denver, and he was coming off his first trip to the Copper Canyon and had just his first article in Runner's World had just come out. So he brought the first article about the Tarahumara Indians with him for our meeting, and I was so excited about that because they're quite an inspiration for me and my ultra running career. And so I was trying to pick his brain just as much as he was trying to pick mine. But ultimately, we planned to meet for 2 days in Denver. And after that first day, it became quite obvious to me that he was really bummed out about his running and really wanted to become a runner. So I really went back to the hotel that night and ripped up my script for the next day and just devoted that next day to teaching him how to run. And that's all we worked on. And that day culminated with us sitting on the golf course green at City Park in Denver and kind of devising this idea of going down to the Copper Canyon. And that was really the kind of the first just the beginning of Born to Run, the whole process. So about a month later, he called me and said, "Hey, let's do it. Will you coach me?" And that's kind of how it all got started.
Okay. It sounds like a lot of your training is directed towards getting the proper form first, getting some of those neuromuscular circuits to fire in the proper way, and then adding distance later. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to training?
Yeah. And talking about that and using Chris as a good example is I look at all of that. And for me, there's kind of a three-prong approach that you have to look at form, you have to look at strength, and you have to look at the actual cardiovascular training or the running foundation of the actual training. So run form is obviously very important, and there's a lot of chatter now about, is there a right way to run or is there a wrong way to run? You can find studies that prove one way or prove the other, but what no one's talking about and what I feel is the most important element is how good form really makes you feel and how it creates muscle equilibrium, and it actually becomes a form of strength training while you're running. And no one talks about that, and it's something that can't be proven necessarily, which is what everybody wants to do. So I apply good form that is good strength and firing muscle patterns in an appropriate way, and then apply that to strength, where I start with foot strength first. Everything we do as a runner is on our feet. So again, no one talks about training the feet, and I have a system to train the feet that activates muscles or that neuromuscular pathways that you talked about earlier that really sets the foundation for how our muscles are used all the way up through the hip. And then applying all that to how we train as runners and developing what I call raw speed and raw strength initially while we're building our base, or what we would typically consider, building long miles. So for me as a coach, it's a fine balance of developing early season strength and speed, as well as developing that endurance base that we need to apply that to speed endurance later on. So again, full circle with Chris, his problem was that he was inefficient in a lot of ways, and therefore he could not run slowly well, which means every time he went out, it was uncomfortable for him to run in a comfortable effort to allow him to put in base miles. Therefore, he would speed up to make it more comfortable, and therefore overtrain and develop these injuries. And that's a common thing I see for a lot of runners, is that the more inefficient we are, the harder it is for us to run slowly and appropriately. So I could go on forever and ever, but that was really the core of what Chris and I worked on, which then led to developing proper intensities for the purpose of each run.
Okay. So it sounds like most people, as they're training at a faster pace, they become slightly more efficient, but as they slow down and start slogging through the miles, maybe some of those injuries start to creep in, some of that form starts to deteriorate. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And that's something that maybe sounds a little counterintuitive, where someone thinks, oh, I'm just putting in long, slow miles. And I'm not. We always think about hearing about speed and some of the intensity side that leads to injuries, but I believe most times injuries come from the slow running, because that's the majority of the running we're doing. And for example, for Chris, every time he was taking a step, he was breaking down. And the more inefficient we are, the harder it is for us to run slowly. So again, we're thinking we're running slowly, I'm doing what I should be doing, but we're breaking our body down, and we need to reverse that process.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So
and again, that real quickly, that's done through understanding what a slow, appropriate pace is, so you're patient with it. But then also on the other side, doing short sprints, doing short hill repeats during that base building helps develop that efficiency, which is what we did with Chris early on. And he went from, in a matter of 6 weeks, he was up to almost 4-hour run without much base, what we would consider, traditional base building.
Okay. So how does mileage play a factor here? You said within about 6 weeks you got him up to a 4-hour run and injury free.
Right.
And is that like one run a week? Is he doing that every day? How does mileage play a role in your program?
Yeah, where it gets tricky from a coaching standpoint is that it's really hard for me to give a general answer because everybody's so different. Mm-hmm. With Chris, would I have had to have done it a little bit slower and had more time? Absolutely. We didn't. But it also went to amplify the effects of instituting sprints and hill repeats and strength runs early season that helps develop that foundation. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but volume is very important. And I guess I would answer it this way: is that it's more important to look what you're doing throughout the whole week rather than just one run.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It sounds like your methods are a little bit counterintuitive from a lot of the books I've read on running. They say you start out the season with real kind of slow running, you're building your base, and then later on you add some speed. But you're saying start out with the speed first, get your form down, and then add more mileage.
Again, the trick for me is to do that both at the same time. So building mileage and volume is important, especially dependent on the athlete or the runner. A more seasoned runner, that's less of importance because they probably have that base of volume, whereas more of a beginner, they need to build slowly. But it's understanding the level of intensities to allow you to marriage the slow miles with speed and strength.
Okay.
And it's also important to understand what speed is. What early season, I'm talking, 10, 15 second intervals.
Okay.
10, 15, 30 second, not 4 or 5 minutes. Okay. 4 or 5, 3 to 5 minute hard, fast intervals are speed endurance intervals, and that's done later.
Okay.
So I think that's an important thing to say is that when I talk about raw speed early season, it's training your body to just go faster and fire more muscles and invite them to the party, because that's going to help you on those slower runs become more efficient. And that's what helped Chris.
Okay. So you helped Chris. Do you have some other success stories that you could talk to us about?
Oh,
people are probably listening and thinking, okay, he helped one guy. If they haven't read Born to Run, you've got to go read it. But what other people are there? Do you have elite athletes? Is this for an everyday runner, or what kind of people are you helping?
Yeah, well, prior to Born to Run, kind of my niche and what I was good at and where I was really passionate was helping what I consider fast people get faster. So I helped a lot of people kind of who were maybe that second tier level, really make those small increments of improvement that really helped catapult their ability. So I've coached triathletes to world championships in every distance, which I'm proud of because that shows my diversity and understanding that I can get someone to do a sprint distance or an Ironman. And that translates over to now ultra running, where, I have people training for short trail races all the way up to 100 miles. And I've had great success with that. So that's prior to Born to Run. I was really helping kind of the sub-elite athlete really improve and take what they have and really make that next leap. But then since Born to Run, I was in a unique situation where I had, literally thousands of people who really identified with Chris. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, I get an email every week saying, hey, I'm just like Chris. How can you help me? So that's been the challenge now is how can I help, thousands of people put all this together that they may think they understand part of what needs to take place, but that's where I wanted writing my book to come out and to really give the whole story and the whole way to put it together. And then readers can kind of pick and choose, how much they want to do or how much of the program they want to do.
Okay. So your book is called The Cool Impossible. What does that phrase mean?
The Cool Impossible is what the tagline is, dreaming beyond fear and living beyond limits. And what that really means is that we as athletes and we as humans, it's human nature to kind of want to know what an outcome's going to be if we're going to take it on. Hey, if I do a 100-miler, what's going to happen? It's just human nature to want to wonder and what that's going to look like. And that creates fear. And mainly because we can never know the answer until we do it. And the cool impossible is to break down those mental barriers to say, hey, you're not going to know. And it's not important whether you knew or not. Let's just do it. And let's just, go for it and see what happens. And so the Cool Impossible book itself mirrors what I do from a physical standpoint in training, run form, strength training, run training, and nutrition, and combines that with mental training and a very specific program for mental training that will take people ultimately through to help them develop their own Cool Impossible and do things they don't think they can do.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about that mental training? We've had some people on talking about the role of the mind in running and how it regulates fatigue and running form. And can you expound on that, or what your approach is to using the mind, I guess?
Yeah, I think, depending on the athlete, I say in the book that a lot of times we hear the body follows the mind. I think it's a yin yang thing, is that it's not just one way. And I believe first and foremost, the body or the mind follows a good body, meaning if we train with discipline, we train appropriately, we get rewards from that. That's a great thing about fitness is we do more, we do things better, our body responds physically, and we gain confidence from that. And that confidence helps the mind, therefore be able to think maybe beyond what is possible. And then as we get into it, the mind starts controlling the body. So it's a yin yang. It's not one or the other. And that's really what the book is about. And my philosophy of training the mind is that, we have to have awareness of our physical training, but we also have to have the awareness of what we think. And a lot of times what we think we see as true, or that we believe it. And it's just thought. And we need to have the awareness of that thought so we can move beyond the barriers that may stop us. And again, I have a really specific protocol using visualization, using imagery, using mantras that is a program just like, a foot strength program. So it's not just philosophy, although there's philosophy in it, but from that philosophy, I put together a very specific program that you can follow to train the mind just like you would your running.
One of the things I really like about distance running, especially some of these longer distances, is that the mental aspect to it, that it takes you to a new level. And you were talking about some of these breakthrough experiences that you can have where, you take it to a new level where you didn't think you could achieve something and then you do it. Have you had some experiences like that in your running career?
Yeah, I think that's what's so cool about running in general. And there's, I've done a lot of sports, whether team sports or individual, and the running is really unique. And I don't know if we know why, but there's just something that happens while we're out there that it kind of creates that awareness, or what I call running in the flow, of where we just have that conversation with ourselves, and it just creates possibilities. And I think that's what's, again, so cool about longer distances, that you have that time to spend with yourself. So, I literally can have that experience anytime I want. And, that's what, I've had, whether it's racing or just having adventure runs in the mountains. It's really no different to me. I've had, that's really where my creative process comes out, and how I can express myself. And just from a personal standpoint, that's where I feel most creative. When I need to write something, I go for a run and I write it in my mind and come back and write it down. It's much easier for me to do that than sit down at the desk. So I've really created cool things for myself that's really started when I've been out running.
You talked about that you have this multifaceted approach to running, and another topic I'd like to hit on is nutrition. What's your approach to nutrition?
Oh boy. I think I guess the how
Well, I know the reason I ask is,
you know that's a can of worms.
yeah.
Clearly.
Well, a lot of the listeners that have been listening to the show are a little bit interested in the paleo diet. That's, it seems to be the latest nutrition buzz out there lately, and it's something that's helped me in my running. And I'm kind of wondering, is it just a standard approach, get your fruit and veg, your whole grains, or do you have a specific way of looking at it that's different than others?
For me personally, as a coach, I look at it as a whole, and I experience and try to experiment as much as I can, because I believe, we can, whether it's paleo or vegan or whatever, my philosophy is that it goes back to that awareness, is how are foods making me feel? And with all the blogs out there now, all the information out there, you can read whatever you want to believe. And that's a confusing thing for people. And that the message I'm trying to get across is have awareness of what you're putting in your mouth. And with that awareness, notice how you feel, good and bad. And it's just like physical training. The more you do something, the more you have an acute awareness of how your body feels based on what you're eating. And with that, I think we focus, and this is a general statement, there's a lot of very knowledgeable people out there. But I think in general, we focus so much on fitting ourselves into a category, and what we should do, that we lose sight of maybe all the basics that we're still doing, of eating the crap, of eating the sugar. And that sometimes gets lost. And whether you eat meat or not, I don't know if we can all prove that. I know what I believe because I know what I feel good at. And that's what I'm trying to get across in the book, is have the awareness of how your body feels. But to wrap that up, is I think we still need to focus a lot more on eating clean fruits, vegetables, meat, if you choose to, and most importantly, get away from the crap we all know that we shouldn't be eating, the processed foods and the sugar. And I think sometimes, again, we lose that focus when we're trying to prove the other side of things.
Okay. So one of the things I like to ask people who come on the show is, what do you eat in a typical day? Sometimes it's interesting to hear, what's on your plate.
Yeah, getting back to your earlier question, I try to keep things simple. And what that allows me to do is remain consistent, or what I call eating 95-5, eating well 95% of the time. So I try to keep things simple. I don't use a recipe, because I think that, again, adds time, and I'm the cook in the family. So that's kind of just my style. But I'll have eggs and some fruit in the morning. Depending on what kind of run I'm doing that day, I'll try to time my breakfast, an hour or so before a run. So again, every day is a little different. But then for lunch or a post run, I'll probably try to have a big salad with some type of meat. Usually, I'm a big fish. I love fish because it's easy. I can make a lot. So again, some kind of salad with some type of protein for lunch, with some fruit. And then for dinner, more veggies and usually some type of protein. So I don't eat meat every day. But again, I don't try to lump myself into one category. Some days I'll eat vegetarian, some days I eat meat. So for me, the focus on is remaining consistent and staying away from the crap and eating as clean as possible.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have the fortunate ability, living up here in Jackson, to have access to great, buffalo, elk, all these game meats that are really, really convenient. So we do eat a lot of that, which is, I think, unique to our environment here.
You're in Jackson, Wyoming?
Yes.
Okay. So you must have some great trails out there, I imagine.
Yeah, it's world-class running, and it really is. I mean, I spent 11 years in Denver, in Colorado, and love Colorado, but there's no mountains in the States like the Tetons.
So another topic I'd like to move on to is you recently came out with some footwear, and they're really interesting. They're kind of a split toe design. How did you come up with that? How did you get started in creating your own shoe? And what are your thoughts on footwear?
Well, that was actually kind of one of my cool impossibles. Once Born to Run came out, I had a gentleman from Atlanta call me. He read the book and he essentially wanted me to help him start a run shoe company. So we're co-founders of B2R, which is one of my ways to help runners have the tools they need to put it all together. So it's been a long process. We have a road shoe that is out now that came out in August, and it's online only right now. And I'm right in the middle of proto testing, hopefully my last version of our first trail shoe. So ultimately, we're going to have 2 road shoes and 2 trail shoes. One would be for shorter distance and one would be for longer distance, respectively. Mm-hmm. And yes, right now they have a split toe, but we're not necessarily confining ourselves to a split toe for every shoe.
Okay. What is the importance of footwear? As you were talking earlier about running form. How does footwear play a role in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Footwear, foot strength, and form all kind of play a role together. And having again, now we've got all these buzzwords, minimal shoes and natural running and all that, but the more natural environment you can eventually get into with a shoe through proper strength training and proper training, the better you're going to use your muscles, which going back to what we were saying earlier, the better you use your muscles, the more efficient you're going to be. But ultimately, when we use our muscles appropriately, what happens is what I call muscle equilibrium. And therefore, we don't have dominant muscles and weak muscles. That, again, creates efficiency. But even more importantly, no one talks about is it's how it makes us feel. But what I mean by that is it takes away the aches and pains. Mm-hmm. We don't as runners need to have tight hip flexors and tight IT bands. I think we get somewhat brainwashed that that's just par for the course, that we're a runner and the more I run, the tighter I'm going to get. Tightness is the opposite of muscle equilibrium, and that can be trained. And footwear plays a significant role in taking away the aches and pains and tightness. And so that's my answer with shoes. Mm-hmm. Is that through whatever, everybody's different, and that's what I'm seeing. There's not just one answer of how to get there, but foot strength and really training the feet and your calves to get you in that minimal or natural environment with a shoe is very important.
Mm-hmm. What some people who might not be familiar with minimal shoes, mm-hmm. What is the difference? I mean, someone the other day asked me, where should I go to buy a pair of running shoes? And I was like, oh man, right. I don't even know where to start because there's so many different options out there. And if you've been in a traditional running shoe for most of your life, going to a minimal style, more natural foot movement is going to be a huge difference. What's your advice?
Yeah, and I think with that real quickly, we can't look at this maybe as an all or nothing proposition. I train mountain bikers, and mountain bikers who race, they're picking a tire based on the conditions, based on the distance, and based on the conditions that day and PSI. So, we can also look at shoes that way. So someone who's coming from a very built up shoe, heel strike environment can use a minimal shoe as a training tool. Mm-hmm. Once or twice a week, they go out in that shoe to help work on form, help work on foot strike, and help develop that strength. And eventually, as they develop that strength, they're able to do more and more in that shoe. And a good clue I tell people is that once you get proper foot strength and good form, your old shoes will start feeling uncomfortable. And at that time, that's a good kind of alarm bell to let you know that maybe you can make that transition fully over to the minimal shoe.
Okay.
But I think you also asked about what is a minimal shoe. And I think there's 2 distinctions. Is that one, just a lower profile in general, or the thickness of your outsole and midsole, mm-hmm. But then also what they call a zero drop, which is the height differential from your heel to your forefoot. And a zero drop is, again, what I consider the most natural type of shoe that allows your foot to act most natural. And again, now you're going to find a variety of ways to go with that. But those are the 2 distinctions I like to have people look for in a shoe.
Okay. Are your shoes zero drop?
They're zero drop, and again, the reason we split the toe was the big toe plays a significant role in stability. Is that toe acts as a natural stabilizer, which helps the arch act as a natural stabilizer, which stabilizes the knee and the hip. So now we're separating that, so you get that articulation and are able to use that big toe to really help create that stabilization that we need to be healthy runners. And then from a design standpoint, I'm a traditional runner, and I wanted our shoes to look normal and look like a shoe, look like a running shoe. And, that was big on my priority list as well. So I think we've accomplished that.
Okay. So, we've talked about a lot of topics here. What are one or two things that listeners to this interview can do to improve their running?
I think it's a loaded question, but I think I'll answer it with some points that I know a lot of people aren't thinking about. And that, again, I keep alluding to foot strength, is that, we know strength training is good for us, and we have muscles on the bottoms of our feet, and nobody's training them, and we can train them. And it's so powerful and so potent, and such a performance enhancement that I really, that's my passionate message, is to get people to start thinking about training their feet, just like we know we need to train our core. You don't have to convince someone how important training their core is. Whether they do it or not is another thing, but it's my passion to get that message out there that our feet are just as important, if not more, than everything else in our body from a running standpoint, and we need to train those. And then again, going back to what we talked about, Chris, is that, really understanding intensity and how important building a strength foundation of sprints and hill work can be for any type of runner. I hear it all the time. I'm not competitive, and I'm not a racer, but I want to run healthy. Well, you should still do sprints and hills. So, and again, I just really answer it by what we talked about earlier.
Well, Eric, it's been great having you on the show today. Where can people go to find out more about your methods?
Yeah, well, again, my reason for putting the book out was to really get everything I've done the last 20 years out to thousands of people that have been asking me for the last 3 years. So the best form is going to be The Cool Impossible, which comes out May 7th. Book tour information, and my blog are all on thecoolimpossible.com. If they want to know about the shoes, they can go to borntorun.com, and that's with the number 2. So okay. Born to Run.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll put a link up to both those sites and to your Amazon, a link to your book on Amazon in the show notes.
Awesome. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and I think you've given our listeners lots to think about. So thanks so much for being part of the show.
I really appreciate it, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to another episode of Paleo Runner Podcast. To find out more information, go to paleorunner.org. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter. Go to facebook.com/runpaleo or find me on Twitter with the handle @runpaleo. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes and leave a review. Thanks for listening.